This is Justice for South Dakota, Episode 6, Follow the Money. Jeffrey Haskell and Timothy John Evans. Multiple corporations and tax evasion. This is perhaps one of the absolute hardest episodes for me to do, to realize that it is only through pure greed and money that entire lives are completely destroyed. Now, our government can only run on tax dollars. There are multiple different ways that a business is taxed. There's the federal income tax, which businesses have to withhold from their employees' paychecks. There's the self-employment tax. So if you're employed by yourself, then you have to pay both the employer and the employee portions of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and federal unemployment and state unemployment benefits. Then businesses are, if you have an employee and you're not self-employed, businesses have to withhold Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid portions from their employees' paychecks because there's a portion that both the employer and the employee has to pay. And then there's the federal unemployment tax, which the business owner is responsible for paying. And then there's state unemployment portions. So if you are individual self-employed, the tax, there's multiple different laws on how you have to withhold taxes and send in estimates and everything else. Now, how do you get away from not paying these taxes? And the answer is that the taxes are only paid on income which is earned. There's different levels of taxes. So tax evasion is illegal non-payments, whether it's underpaying your taxes or false declarations of not owing any taxes. This could also include illegitimate business expenses. So you claim that something's actually an expense, which is not taxed at all, and so that you don't have to have as much money over as personal income earned. These tax evasions include both criminal and civil legal penalties. So what is DIV 1841, the real cause behind it? And the clear answer is that Jeff Haskell hates Rachel. Jeff Haskell, his wife Suze, and Tim all met each other in 6th grade in Great Falls, Montana. Jeff and Suze got married when they were 19. Tim got married, as we covered in the previous episodes, and then he raped Rachel and wound up marrying her 2005. Rachel's 15 years younger than all of the other three. Tim had his affair with Suze. Tim is known as Jeff's mistress. Jeff sexually molested Rachel, continued to believe that she would participate in wife swapping with the other three of them. Rachel refused. Jeff is now slighted. So he mandated that Tim had to divorce Rachel to force her into submission. Number 2, Rachel follows the law. In 2013, Rachel stayed with Jeff and Suze for a couple weeks while she was working in South Dakota. And Jeff bragged to Rachel nonstop how he is a self-made millionaire because he knows how to move money in between his corporations. Now, it's too late for the federal government to go after Jeff and pursue him for tax evasion because there's a statute of limitations. So Jeff is bragging about how he claimed, because he had a farm and then he has all these carpet cleaning businesses and other LLCs, and how he just moves money around them if he needs to have deductions or not if one business makes too much money. Rachel disagreed with this philosophy. Jeff is bragging to Rachel about how the metal railing on his deck at his house he claimed was a hay rack on a semi-trailer, and how he could remodel his house and write off most of it so he didn't have to pay income tax on that portion. So Rachel insisted that everything with her family and her business, they paid taxes, they followed the law 100%, there was no illegitimate tax deductions. Rachel stood in Jeff's way of his business schemes. Jeff needed to have all the restoration equipment that Rachel's business had. Rachel had a very profitable business. Jeff was strictly carpet cleaning, and he needed to expand his business, but Rachel stood in his way because Rachel insisted that if they became business partners, that it would be by the book, they would pay taxes, there would be no illegitimate deductions. And then the fourth problem, Rachel owned the restoration business. In episode 5, we covered how Rachel was a 90% shareholder, Tim was a 10%. Tim was already doing illegal stuff with Rachel's business without her knowledge or permission. And when Rachel found out about it, she was like, nope, and starting to pursue legal action so that the business transactions would be 100% cleared and then above board. Now, how does this play into Kristi Noem's perverted judicial system? Well, because every judge has to abide by the Judicial Code of Conduct. This is Appendix A to Chapter South Dakota Codified Law 16-2. And this I'm taking word for word from the Judicial Conduct Preamble. It states that the judicial system is founded on unbiased, unprejudiced, and upholding the law. The law that the South Dakota legislature has enacted and the governor has signed into law. Judges have to respect and honor the judicial office. They have to maintain confidence in the legal system, and they're not allowed to just do whatever they want. They must uphold the law. And now going back to DIV 1841, you'll remember in the previous episodes where we covered that if the judge does not have authority or jurisdiction over a matter, it shall be dismissed. Well, the second paragraph of the Judicial Conduct Preamble states that when the text shall or shall not is used, it's not up to a judge's interpretation. It will be upheld, and violations of such can result in disciplinary action. And this is where Kristi Noem is fully aware that her judges are violating their judicial office, and yet she just turns her head and looks the other way. So now, who started Rapid City Restoration? Well, this was a hot topic during the divorce trial because of what I just covered in the previous slides. Jeff needed Rachel's business. Jeff needed full control over Tim. Jeff needed to have those 90% shares that Rachel had in her multi-million-dollar restoration company. Also, please note this picture of the house here. If you go back to episode 5, you're going to realize that Jeff and Tim are copycats. So Rachel had her restoration company. She had paid to have certain images created for her. She had paid for advertising and everything else. She had created the actual consent forms, all of the agreements. So when you go in to do a restoration job, there's lots of legal paperwork. Rachel had actually typed that up. She'd met with attorneys. She had met with different restoration experts, and she had created forms. Jeff needed all those forms. He didn't want to have to go back and do all of it himself. So he simply stole Rachel's forms through Tim. Now here is proof that Judge Connolly was fully aware of Jeff Haskell and Timothy John Evans' tax evasion and passing money between corporations. This might be kind of a boring episode because it's 100% straight from the transcripts. I said that everything I say is based on facts. It's not based on feeling. And this is volume 3 of the Tim's and Rachel's divorce trial. That, again, is fake because it had no authority or jurisdiction. And this is Jeff Haskell's, the witness. First, he was examined by Tim's attorney, Mitch Johnson. Now, Tim had hired 2 attorneys with over 70 years experience between the 2 of them. And remember, Tim had stolen all of the business income. There was over $140,000 outstanding in business income from jobs already completed by January 23rd, 2018, when Tim had filed for divorce. He funneled that money into Jeff's businesses, and then Jeff paid Tim in different ways so that he didn't have to claim income, so that Rachel wouldn't get any of it, which is how Tim was able to afford over $100,000 in legal fees by the time of this trial. So in this particular, on the right-hand side, Rachel is questioning Jeff Haskell. Have you ever been in the military? And the answer is no. So you would not be considered a veteran? And Jeff says no. And you've already acknowledge that you've known Tim since 6th grade? Yes. Do you consider yourself a good friend of Tim's? And the answer is yes. Do you talk on the phone a lot? Well, they are so close that Tim is referred to as Jeff's mistress all the time. It's acknowledged by Tim, it's acknowledged by Jeff, and also by Jeff's family that Tim is Jeff's mistress. And then Rachel asked Jeff, what was your role in our wedding? And because earlier Jeff said that he didn't meet Rachel until like 2013, and yet they were married in 2005. So he couldn't even remember being in Tim and Rachel's wedding earlier. And Jeff goes, I honestly can't remember. I had a motorcycle accident that I had a very severe concussion. My memory's not what it used to be. So here, under oath, Jeff just admitted that he's not a very competent witness because he doesn't have any memory left after his accident. And so then Rachel asked him, earlier you couldn't remember that you were the best man in our wedding. And Jeff is like, you're right. Sorry. Now that you said that, yeah, I probably was the best man in your wedding. So this is the extent of how Jeff lies in court. Now, these transcripts are Mitch Johnson, Tim's jackass attorney, who has to cover up his tracks because remember he brought in a case that had no jurisdiction. And now he was caught with his pants down because Jeff Haskell has proven how he's been scamming the government and not paying taxes. And so Jeff is trying to establish with Mitch Johnson how Tim is not a business partner with him. So Mitch Johnson specifically asked Jeff Haskell, how many years have you been in business as Jeff Haskell, LLC, doing business as Rapid Restoration? The answer was since 2015. Now, 2015 is when Rachel moved to South Dakota. It was actually December 2014. And Jeff, greedy old Jeff, immediately wanted to have Rachel's restoration business. And so he began doing restoration with Rachel's equipment. Remember that Tim sold over $200,000 worth of Rachel's business, repurchased assets over $150,000 worth, and gave them to Jeff Haskell to use. So that's how Rapid Restoration came about. Don't get confused with Rapid City Restoration. And so then Mitch Johnson continues to go on. Were you in business elsewhere? And he says, yes, in Great Falls, Montana. Since 1987, I had a company called Quality Carpet Services. Do you still own Quality Carpet Services? No, I sold it 3 years ago. So this was 2018. Jeff said he sold Quality Carpet Services in 2015. Dates and names are very important. How do you know Tim Evans? We went to school together since 6th grade. How do you know Rachel? Yes. How long have you known Rachel? Well, I met her at the wedding briefly, and then in 2013. And then it is, currently, are there any owners other than you for Rapid City Restoration? No. And now Mitch Johnson is saying, well, Rachel Evans has claimed that Tim Evans is an owner of Rapid City Restoration. Is she correct or incorrect? Totally incorrect. Now, do you have an attorney who's your corporate attorney for Rapid City Restoration? And Jeff says, yes, it's Rachel Taylor with Banks McCollum Law Firm in Rapid City. And so then Mitch Johnson reiterates, does Tim Evans have any ownership interest in Jeff Haskell, LLC, doing business as Rapid Restoration? And Jeff says no. And so then Mitch asks, what is the business relationship between you and Tim Evans? First of all, does Tim do any work for you or your companies? And Jeff says, yes, I hire him as a subcontractor. Now, knowing business, a subcontractor is paid with a 1099 form, which is directly imputed as a write-off for the company who is doing the subcontracting. And then the independent contractor has to then pay all of the employer and business taxes off of the income given to him on a 1099 form. Rachel worked as a subcontractor for Native Women's Healthcare, and she worked as a subcontractor with her nurse midwifery, in addition to hiring subcontractors work for her with the restoration companies. Like if they had to bill and insurance a job, they would hire a roofer or something 100% on there through a 1099. They would complete the work. Rachel would then bill insurance, get paid the money, and then impute 100% of it over on a 1099 to, say, the roofer. So Rachel was very familiar with how this subcontracting worked. Going back to the interview, Mitch Johnson continues to ask Jeff, how long has Tim been a subcontractor for you? And Jeff says, about 3 years. Now, please go back to the tax income information in episode 5. And tax information doesn't show that Tim was a subcontractor for Jeff Haskell. Anyways, moving on with this questioning, Mitch Johnson and Jeff Haskell clarify that Tim has absolutely nothing to do with anything. He is 100% his own boss. He is 100% his own business. Everything is 100% separate between them. And they reiterate that Quality Carpet Services was sold in 2015. Jeff hasn't had anything to do with it since then. And Jeff pays Tim for his work with checks through Jeff Haskell LLC, doing business as Rapid Restoration. Mitch asks Jeff if he pays workers' comp for Tim, which means he's an employee, and he says no. And then he says, are there any unemployment insurance premiums paid for Tim? Because then he would be considered an employee. And Jeff says no. Do you pay Tim by the hour? Jeff says no. Does Tim have his own equipment? In other words, Rachel's restoration equipment. And Jeff says yes. Do you let Tim use your equipment? And Jeff says no, I wouldn't say I let him use my equipment at all. If I don't have enough equipment on my own, then I hire Tim and his company to come in and subcontract the work for me. And Mitch Johnson reiterates that all this is done under Jeff Haskell LLC, doing business as Rapid Restoration, and Jeff Haskell says yes. And then Mitch Johnson reiterates, Jeff Haskell, doing business as Rapid Restoration, does not do any payroll taxes for Tim Evans or to Tim Evans for Tim Evans. And Jeff is like, nope, it's 100% separate. We do not intermix our business whatsoever. Make sure that you are fully understanding all of this. So these are actual exhibits in this divorce trial that Rachel submitted. And remember that a civil trial is open to the public. It is considered an open court. 100% of what I show is verified by the transcript, and I'm not breaching any confidentiality because they are admitted exhibits. And on July 17th, 2017, Bangs McCullen Law Firm, with this Rachel Taylor attorney, did create and enclose the bylaws for Rapid City Restoration Incorporated. This is different than Rapid Restoration LLC. This is the actual corporation that was at the beginning of this presentation. And on the right-hand side, this is created by Rachel Taylor of Bangs McCullen Law Firm. It specifically says that President Jeff Haskell, Secretary Timothy Evans, Treasurer Jeff Haskell. Now, in order to create a corporation, they had to have be registered with the state of South Dakota and everything else. These are the shareholder stocks for Rapid City Restoration. You're going to see that Jeff Haskell had 510 shares and Timothy John Evans had 490. So is it liar, liar, pants on fire? The more lies you tell under oath in court, your nose continues to grow like Pinocchio? Or is it legally called perjury? So under South Dakota Codified Laws 22-29-1, any person who has taken an oath to testify, declare, depose, or certify as true before a competent tribunal, which would be considered in this case testimony under oath in front of Judge Connolly, intentionally state something contrary to that oath of telling the truth, if that person continues to state any material known to be false, is guilty of perjury. This is technically a criminal case now because Jeff Haskell is admitting to perjury. Now Rachel is questioning Jeff, and remember, Rachel's not a trained attorney, so she just does the best that she can because she had zero legal experience before this proceeding with Timothy John Evans. And so Rachel says, do you ever let Tim use your credit card to buy things? Jeff says, yes. Okay, so do you know if you have a credit card ending in 3450? And Jeff says, I probably do, but I haven't memorized my credit card endings. And Rachel clarifies with Jeff, you said Rapid City Restoration has had zero income for the year 2018. And Jeff says, yes. And Rachel's like, okay, but you let Tim use your credit card to buy things with? And he said, yes. And so now Rachel's proceeding to show this scheme of tax evasion and how Jeff Haskell has not paid any employer taxes on Tim as an employee, and he hasn't issued income to Tim on a 1099, but they just kind of go back and forth. And if Tim owes any money, Jeff will pay it and then claim it as a business deduction. So that way they lower their individual tax liabilities. And Rachel's also proving how she just brought up the shares for Rapid City Restoration Incorporated using her restoration equipment. But if this restoration company is active at the time of divorce trial, then technically Rachel owns a share of it. And so Jeff is trying to cover up because Tim filed for divorce January of 2018. They started the corporation in July 2017. They were supposed to backdate it until March of 2017. And now they're trying to say that it doesn't exist. So Rachel has brought in document after document after document proving this partnership and tax evasion. So all of these are exhibits. I will happily send them to anybody, but I did not feel like uploading them to this presentation because it would make it even longer because the testimony speaks for itself. So then Rachel says, going through one exhibit, what is the logo on top of this letterhead? And Jeff goes, Rapid City Restoration Incorporated. Why would you have Rapid City Restoration when it's a non-existent business? And Jeff goes, well, because of January 1st, 2019, I'm going to be switching everything over to Rapid City Restoration. Notice this is after the divorce trial, so therefore, any partnership that Jeff and Tim have, they're going to claim Rachel doesn't get a share of it because it was after the divorce trial in November 2018. That's why they changed their date to January 1st, 2019. And then Rachel says, so you're currently using that logo on all of your stuff, all of your businesses? And Jeff says, yep. So why would you give Tim a credit card for fuel if he's not operating any of your... And Jeff cuts her off and says, because I paid the... And the court's like, you have to wait for Rachel to finish talking. Jeff is like, oh. So Rachel goes, you testified earlier he does not operate your equipment. Why would you give him a fuel card? Here comes the perjury. His nose is growing like Pinocchio. I didn't say he doesn't operate my equipment. Did I say that? Well, I'm sorry. Refer back a couple slides. And Rachel continues to go on, and then Jeff starts to clarify because now he realizes that he's getting himself in hot water. And he says, oh, well, yeah, he'll drive my vehicles, and I drive his vehicles at times. So then Rachel brings up Defendant Exhibit 21, and Mr. Johnson realizes again that his star witness, number one, said he can't remember anything because of a brain injury, and now he's being found guilty of perjury in a court of law. And so he's quick to help, calm Jeff down and that sort of thing. So Mr. Johnson jumps in, and then Rachel says, do you recognize this document, Defendant Exhibit 21? And Jeff says yes. Rachel's like, is that your signature? Jeff says yes. Now we're skipping ahead a couple pages, and Rachel asked to offer Exhibit 21 as evidence, and the court receives it. It's now officially part of the record, which is why we're talking about it. Now we're moving on to Defendant Exhibit 22. Can you please tell me what this document is? It appears to be a Verizon bill, and it was adding a cell phone to Jeff's Verizon bill. And so as we're talking through that, Jeff admits it is his current address, his current email address. Oh, wait, what company name is on the top of this Verizon bill? Well, it's Quality Carpet Services, the business that Jeff is no longer involved in since 2015. All right, so does it state the phone number that's being added to this Quality Carpet Services line? Jeff says yes. And then he says, oh, I see it. That phone belongs to Timothy John Evans. And then Rachel says, if you'll please turn to page 2, that would be Tim's signature, adding his cell phone to Jeff's Quality Carpet Services Verizon account. And Jeff says yes. So then Rachel says, can you please tell me the date that he signed it? Oh, the date is July 20th, and he wouldn't say the year. So Rachel's like, what's the year, please? 2017. So remember, this is just a couple days after Tim and Jeff became partners with Rapid City Restoration. Tim is now signing as an officer, which means that you have to be part of the corporation on Quality Carpet Services. In 2017, when Jeff just testified, he got rid of the business in 2015. So Exhibit 22 was received into evidence, and now they're going to move on to Exhibit 23, which is Quality Carpet Services. And it's a loan agreement that Quality Carpet Services is the one paying for Tim's cell phone because he had to buy a brand new $1,000-something phone. You can look at the exhibit and go into all the details. It is the same phone number belonging to Tim John Evans. So now Jeff is paying for a phone and phone services for Timothy John Evans when allegedly they just testified they have zero business interaction. It's 100% separate. This is tax evasion at its finest. Now we're going to go on to Exhibit 23 was received into evidence. And we're going to go on to another one. Exhibit 24. Can you please tell the court what this affiliate information form is for? And Jeff says, yes, it is Metro Service Solutions. And it's a mold job that I did 1.5 years ago. I think it's a company that contacted me, and then they had to become an affiliate. They had to fill out, see, when a business hires you as a 1099, there's like an intake form, and to prove it's all above board, this is where they get their tax information for their 1099s. And so this is during 2018. Jeff just said this form was for 1.5 years ago. And Rachel says, please tell me the company name that this affiliate Metro Service Solutions is entering into. And Jeff Haskell says it's Rapid City Restoration Incorporated, which was started July of 2017, but Jeff claims is not in business. And so Rachel clarifies a non-existent business, and Jeff goes, oh, it's existing. I just haven't activated it at this time. There's been some complications, parentheses, your divorce, close parentheses, and I wasn't going to do it in the middle of a year. And they said to wait until, after the first of the year. So instead of 2018, we're going to move it to 2019. So Rachel says, okay, do you recognize all these phone numbers? And specifically at 605-858-2726, Jeff says, yes. Is that a cell phone or landline? It's a cell phone. So Rapid City Restoration now has a cell phone, 605-858-2726. And then Rachel continues on because they're going through this agreement. And who carries that cell phone? Oh, Tim might carry it for me. Okay, so Tim carries a cell phone to Rapid City Restoration Incorporation, a business that he's not even involved with. And Rachel says, again, what's the logo on this notepad that he says is for a non-existent business, Rapid City Restoration? Rachel gave all the evidence to Judge Connolly. He's looking through this at the same time. And Rachel says, wait a minute here. And the Judge Connolly says, wait, it doesn't reflect the testimony that it's non-existent. And then Judge Connolly says, he testified the business is existent, it's just not in operation. Well, if it's not in operation, how come they're filling out 1099s to receive information and payment on Rapid City Restoration? And so Rachel continues on, but all the logos say Rapid City Restoration versus Rapid Restoration. Rapid Restoration is Jeff's doing business as name. And so technically they're funneling money through different businesses, trying to avoid paying taxes. And then we're continuing on with this form. Rachel goes on to say, now if you go to the diversity supplier on this form, does it say that it is a veteran-owned business? And Jeff Haskell has to look at it, and he's like, yep. It says that the company is a minority-owned, woman-owned, or veteran-owned business. Now Jeff realizes he is in massively hot water. First off, he's not a minority. He's white. He's not a woman, but Rachel's a woman, and Rachel owned 90% of her business. And he's not a veteran. Timothy John Evans is a veteran. All this has been extensively covered. Jeff tries to backpedal, and he says, "Oh, well, I didn't fill this form out on behalf of my business." And so Rachel's like, "Oh, that's funny. Who did?" And he goes, "Well, Timothy Evans did." Okay, Tim Evans filled out a form for Jeff Haskell's business when Tim Evans isn't involved with it whatsoever. Or is your mind swirling yet? And so then Rachel goes on, well, what date did he fill it out on? October 1st, 2017. What title did Tim Evans put down filling out this form? Well, he's the restoration coordinator. And so then Rachel continues to go on, well, how can he be a restoration coordinator if he's not employed by you, never has been employed by you, and he's only a independent contractor paid through a 1099? How can he be doing forms claiming he's a business partner with you? And Jeff Haskell's continuing to backpedal, and Judge Connolly continues to receive these documents into evidence. And now Rachel continues on, now Jeff, you have to have a commercial insurance policy for your business, correct? Because remember, Rachel's been a business owner. She's run the restoration company since 2005. It's now 2018. She is very familiar with what's required of running a multi-million-dollar restoration company. And Jeff is in agreement, yes. Does each business have its own policy, or does one policy cover each business? Because the answer is each business has to have its own policy. And Jeff answers that his policy only covers him. So then Rachel says, does it cover your employees? And Jeff says no. Why? Because Jeff hires them under the table. He is not legit with how he hires his employees. And then Rachel's referring to this email on the right-hand side, and she says, what logo's on the truck over here? And Jeff Haskell says, well, that's Rapid City Restoration. What phone number's on that truck? Again, the call line for Rapid City Restoration. So who carries that cell phone? Oh, now Jeff is trying to backpedal. He says, well, I carry it. And then Tim does sometimes too. And so then Rachel says, who owns this truck? And Jeff goes, well, Tim does. And let's clarify, Tim does not own this truck. Rachel owns 90% of this truck that now Jeff is admitting under oath he's using for his business when he alleges there's no correlation whatsoever. So Rachel's asking him, can you please explain why your logo would be on a vehicle that I own when you guys are not business partners like you and Tim aren't? So there's no correlation between my business and your business. And Jeff says, well, Tim chose to put the letters on the truck. That way he could promote my business for me. And so then Rachel says, did you know that Tim had this truck detailed and wrapped? Now, if you look at this box truck, it had a very expensive wrap all the way around it. And they frequently use this truck to advertise to the realtors and landlords of Rapid City for different luncheons that they paid for and stuff like that. And Jeff says, yes, I'm acknowledging that I have used your truck to promote my business at these luncheons. And then Rachel's going through the email and she says, now the pictures on page 1, 2, and 3, are they consistent with damage to this vehicle that you are aware of? So here's the first page of the exhibit. Here's the second and third pages of this exhibit. And Jeff's answer was yes. So then Rachel continues on, who was driving this truck when it was totaled? And Jeff says, oh, my son was driving it. However, Dylan, who was driving the truck, wasn't 18. He's not by law allowed to be on a commercial business policy. Henceforth, Dylan is not on Jeff's policy because he's only 17. And he's not on Rachel's business policy because Dylan doesn't work for Rachel. So Dylan works for Jeff by his own admission. He's not covered by the commercial policy. What's he doing driving Rachel's truck? And Jeff is now realizing where Rachel's going with this line of questioning. He's trying to backpedal and he says, oh, well, yeah, he drove it under an awning and he helps me occasionally and I borrowed the truck. And so Dylan drove it and he completely demolished the top of it, but it was because I had to transport my equipment to a job site. Now let's back up here. This truck is full of equipment that Rachel owns that is only used on Rachel's restoration sites. There's no room for Jeff to put his equipment in because this box truck was full of Rachel's equipment. So now they are again mixing businesses and committing perjury. So then Rachel goes on, was this accident reported to law enforcement and was an accident report filed? I mean, that's a pretty extensive damage to the truck. And Jeff is like, no, it was on private property. Why would we want to report this to law enforcement? Now, the story that Rachel was told by Tim when he told her that a business vehicle was totaled is that Dylan was actually going through the Taco Bell drive-through on Mount Rushmore Road and he hit an overhang. So whether that story is true or not, who knows? That would be considered private property, but at bare minimum, a law officer should have been called because damage was done to a commercial vehicle. They have different laws than private vehicles, and there should have been a document and also an insurance claim to repair it. Well, Jeff is continuing on with his testimony saying that he didn't want to report it to law enforcement. He was just going to pay Tim outright for the damage. Now remember who owns the company. Who would get the money? Rachel would get the money because Jeff's son destroyed Rachel's equipment, but Jeff is saying he's going to pay Tim. And then Rachel says, have you paid Tim? And the answer is no, he hasn't asked me for money yet. Well, you've just said that the wrap job cost over $1,500 and the box is totaled. So when are you going to owe and pay up all this money? And Jeff is like, after the divorce trial's over so that you don't get any of it. And the exhibit was offered into evidence. So again, we're going to follow the money. I know this was kind of a make your head spin presentation, but ultimately Jeff and Tim were illegally passing money back and forth through using each other's credit cards or lack thereof and not paying each other how is required by law, therefore reducing their personal liability of taxes, and therefore it's considered tax evasion. And then there are other exhibits that were entered in proves that on Tim's personal tax returns, he didn't claim income and he failed to pay Montana state income tax on the income earned because he was doing this back and forth thing with Jeff through two different states, Montana and South Dakota. So if you want to know why DIV 1841 went on and why Judge Connolly kept turning his head after he's been faced with 100% black and white evidence of tax evasion, and he also granted the divorce for extreme cruelty on the grounds of Rachel saying tax evasion. So even though we just proved this back and forth, he said it could cause Tim mental anguish to be accused of tax evasion, even though we just proved it, so therefore a divorce was justified. So he penalized Rachel for bringing up the truth. Again, we're going to ask that Governor Noem executes her sworn duties of a governor and that she enforces compliance of these justices with the constitutional and legal powers that they swore to uphold when they entered office. So we've already explored due process of law, and I'm going to continue telling you how it is violated every single day by the Seventh Circuit Court and now the South Dakota Supreme Court, because Justice Gilbertson, who has since retired, and Justice Jensen are fully aware of all these. They reviewed the court documents, they had the transcripts in front of them, and they chose to turn their head because multi-million-dollar businesses were now coming into Pennington County, and they chose to turn their head, condone this tax evasion so that the businesses would come into Pennington County. So stay tuned for episode 7, where we're going to discuss how Pennington County justices then steal children and destroy families in an effort to get people to shut up and keep all of this quiet. They are trying to force people like myself and multiple other individuals into silence. And this is where I'm going to continue bringing up story after story, not just of my case, but of other people's cases as well, proving what I say is true. So again, Justice for South Dakota Families is a privately funded public exposure of the perverted judicial system in Pennington County and how Kristi Noem is fully aware of all of their actions, and she turns her head and continues to allow rulings only for white privileged males, which directly go against Native American Indians, ethnic minorities, females, and destroy families. Please consider donating, spread the word, spread these episodes, and contact me with your stories.